There are lots of begonias appearing now that are hardy or borderline hardy. This one is tie-dye, and of course it has those big sort of almost like Rex begonia leaves with that nice sort of almost silvery. It's sort of definitely glistens in the sun. And if that's not showy enough for you, I mean, one I've had for absolutely years, and it's much more showy offy, is Beneticiba, which again has that amazing metallic sort of surface to the leaf. Now, Alan will recognise this because I spent ages looking for this, and then of course walked around Alan's garden and it's there in abundance. But this little tiny Oxalis, which is called Plum Crazy, I think. Alan's got it planted in pots, sort of spilling out all over the place with lots of silver-leaved things. It looks great. But it's such a pretty little thing with these sort of pink splashed leaves. And it, again, propagates very easily. So I've just been picking bits off all summer and sticking them in pots of compost, and it just roots. I'm not in love with the yellow flowers on it, but if you want something a little bit smaller, I think that's great. How did you come across it, Alan? Because you've really gone for it this year, haven't you?
Well, I came across it my last autumn 2022 plant fairs, where I first got it, and I bought a couple of pots from a stall there. And then I just propagated it. As you say, I'm an avid propagator. I can't stop myself. And, you know, a new plant like that. And I mean, I had outside my potting shed, I was working up there one day and the garden was open to visitors. And I had trays and trays of this. And these ladies kept coming past, oh, what's that? And I said, well, I'm propagating these to go in my pots for the summer. This is about April, I suppose. And, oh, well, can we buy them? Can we buy them? And I was in great danger of not having enough. But I managed it because, you know, you don't like to disappoint people, and when they see something small in the pot, well, you're not going to get much more than £3 for it, so you just think to yourself, well, that's £3 towards another plant, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and I have just been ripping bits off it constantly, and of course now I've seen what you've done with it, which is, you know, using it as almost as a sort of bedding plant. You know, the possibilities for it are great. I don't know if you planted it. I mean, lots of Oxalis are quite invasive, aren't they? So I don't know if it would be, but
I don't think it's frost hardy, Dan, actually. It might come through in some milder gardens, but I think in most people's gardens it probably wouldn't. And I mean, there is the plain brown leaf version of that, which looks very much like that Oxalis that seeds itself around everybody's garden as a weed. But the brown leaf one doesn't seed like a weed. But I think that and there's a golden leaf form. I don't know whether you've seen that.
I think I have seen it. Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm taking all these little cuttings because my garden's so small. I suppose it applies to what I'm going to show you next. But because my garden is so small, I can't really overwinter the big plants. So some of them I have to let go. And then I keep everything as cuttings or small plants so that in the spring I can sort of virtually start again. But it does break my heart a bit because especially things like Coleus have done incredibly well this year. They've kind of liked the sort of much less dry than last year, and by and large less hot. And they just come into their own in September and October before the temperature drops a lot. And they're really great this year, but I can't keep them at the size that they're at because I have nowhere for them. So they are all becoming cuttings, which is what these will become. I just picked 3 Coleus, and I think they're my 3 favorites actually, because they're not as Coleusy as some Coleus. So I've got Lord Falmouth, which I just don't think you can do without really in any sort of garden.
That's as interesting as any flower, Dan.
Yes.
And pink and green. I love pink and green.
And this isn't even sort of the strongest piece. I've got some lovely photographs of it for you to show people, but it's very, very neat growing. A lot of these smaller leaved Coleus look a bit like a tapestry when they grow. You know, they really, and they vary a little bit as well. So the bits that are slightly more in the sun tend to sort of go a slightly different colour, and the new shoots are a little bit paler and things like that. So it's a really interesting plant. But this, I mean, grows so easily from cuttings. So this is what this is going to be. It's going to be a cutting when we've finished recording this. Lord Falmouth, I think that probably has to be joint #1 favourite, with Burgundy Wedding Train, which again, I mean,
that's very smart.
I think that's my favourite Coleus of all time. I absolutely adore it.
Gorgeous. And you can just see it here, but you get the odd stem that has much more of a lemon splash. It has a very nice habit. This very similar to Lord Falmouth in that it does sort of drape quite nicely, and then where it drapes, it sends up shoots so that you don't end up with all these sort of bare legs. So again, very sort of, it forms a sort of tapestry. Which brings me on to another, the last one that I picked for you, which is called Wisley Tapestry. This has been growing in absolutely no sun whatsoever. So like in a really sort of horrid bit at the end of a passageway. And again, just a huge mound of this sort of slightly antique-y looking foliage. And very neat and polite, and so all of these will be, yes, cuttings that I shall overwinter, and then next year I'll pop them up in. I usually leave it quite late because they aren't lovers of. They're very happy with cool weather. They're not happy with cold weather, so I leave them until the days are quite long, so the end of May, beginning of June, and then I put them out. Also, as well, often that's after sort of slug and snail time as well. So that's
I think one of the things that puts people off Coleus an awful lot is the fact that when they see them grown together en masse, different varieties, different shapes, different colors, they do look something of a mess, I think. But if you do what you do there and you single out the varieties that you actually like and make a big planting of one of those varieties and then a big planting of another or something like that, but don't mix them up too much, because you mix them up and they just look slightly messy, I feel. But so, I mean, what was it, Burgundy Wedding Train, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I could see that immediately in my mind's eye as a big pot on my front doorstep. So that's that's on the list.
And I think it would be great. And I think if you wanted to create a really sort of good mound sort of structure, if you put a few sort of pea sticks in around it, that would help to create a shape. I sort of just let mine sort of drape themselves around, but you could, and I think in Scandinavia, where they're really, really into Coleus, they do all sorts of sort of pruning and training of them to kind of make them into neat shapes. But you could certainly, they don't have the strongest structure, Coleus. So if you can support them a little bit, it does help keep them tidy, especially when you have weather like we've just had.
Now you manufacture and sell garden equipment. I'm going to throw an idea at you, because
go on.
My immediate thing is, you've got a Coleus in a pot and you want it to be this lovely shape. Wouldn't it be nice if you could buy something like a galvanized metal or even a bamboo dome-shaped structure where they could grow their shoots through?
Yeah,
he's writing it down.
I'm writing it down.
I just sort of think that would, and if it's nice enough, which if you did it would be, because everything that you have looks nice. It's an interesting thing to look at as well before the Coleus has got through it.
Yes, something a bit like one of those sort of like cake covers that you get. With bigger gaps in it. Yes, I think it's a great idea. I love that.
I didn't realise this whole Scandinavian love of Coleus. The next time my partner shares his hatred of Coleus and wonders why I like them, I will point out that it's because of my Nordic heritage, and therefore I'm innately drawn to them.
It is funny how, I mean, we don't seem particularly interested in them in this country, but in America they're huge, and in Scandinavia they're huge, but here we just seem to, the garden centres tend to have the seed grown ones, which I have to say are pretty useless, because they go to flower so quickly.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of them, but I like the named varieties.
And it's worth saying, I'm fairly certain, I know for sure Burgundy Wedding Train, I'm assuming the other two are all available from Dilys. They do lovely sort of buy however many plugs. So obviously you could have 3
and
or...
Yes, they do. And I discovered a thing about Dilys as well, which I'll share because, well, they might not thank me for it, but they tend to have sort of 24 varieties on their website every season, and you can choose them, or you can just have a sort of variety pack, as it were. But after I'd been to Chelsea, I realised there were lots of things on their stands that they don't have on their website, and they basically said, "Oh, you just have to phone up, and we'll tell you what we've got available of the other ones at any given time." So if there are specific ones that you're looking for, or if you see something at Chelsea or Hampton Court, then do phone them up, because they have quite a lot of other interesting ones that are maybe not as mainstream, or maybe they don't propagate in quite so much quantity. But yes, so it's worth doing that. Yeah, they'll probably be...
If you can't do that, you could do what I do. You could go to a local nursery, and I don't know where they get them from, how they grow them or whatever, but they have masses of Coleus and have done for several years. And we go over there and we buy a mass of Coleus, but I always select the ones that look the most alike, going back to what we were saying, a single variety, if you like. And I think we're paying around, it's under £2 a plant anyway. I mean, I was going to say about 160 for a small plant in a tiny little pot. But I mean, you know, the answer to the knack of it is being in that nursery at the right time when they're freshly delivered, and you have the pick of the crop, and you take them home, and immediately you get them home, you repot them to keep them growing.
Yeah. They do like to be kept growing on. They don't sit around happily. Definitely.
Just one thing I should say to you, that I've often sort of thought in the middle of winter, how on earth do you keep Coleus growing? Because they are quite difficult in a way. They don't like to be too wet. If they are, they'll just flop and be miserable. I once went to give a talk at a community centre, and in this community centre, in the middle of winter, it was January actually, on the windowsill there was this wonderful plant of this Coleus. It wasn't a named variety, it was just a Coleus. And I suspect as a community centre, it probably been given by somebody. And plonked on this windowsill, and I went over to look at it because it just looked so splendid. And you know, it was as dry could be. And it must have been one day away from drooping. But I thought that is probably the key to keeping them through the winter, is to not overwater them.
Yeah.
Yes, I think with many things that's the case, isn't it? You know, just really keep them on the edge over winter.
It's almost starvation diet.
Yes, yeah.
Do you want to show them? Because I know you've probably taken them all out now, but you did formerly have them all beautifully arranged. All of your little...
I've got a few things arranged in this in a flower bowl there, you see, and I picked this sort of dahlia shaped flower bowl out because it's got a bit of the pink from the back of the leaves. So
that's a lesson to start with. Because there's other pinks in there as well. There's the pinks on the stems of the begonias. If you look at where the begonia, where the flower joins the stem, there's pink there. So, I mean, whether you did that consciously or unconsciously, I don't know. But it's the kind of thing. I mean, I can't help myself doing that.
I think Dan's very similar on that front.
It was very conscious, and then of course a little bit of Lord Falmouth in there as well. But yeah, I love these, you know, especially when you've had weather like we've just had, where you go out in the garden and there are bits broken off all over the shop, and you just think, well, what am I going to do with those? Because, you know, the stems are often not long enough, or there's just one and you don't particularly want to cut a whole load more. So I find these sort of flower bowls with a flower frog in the bottom, which is like a little spiky thing like that. You can just bring a few bits in from the garden and make something of them, and sort of for a bedside table, or, you know, just I put flowers everywhere, to be fair, but you know, and they last a really long time. So yes,
I think you just touched on something, Dan, because, you know, in this day and age where we don't want to create unnecessary waste and everything. I mean, you used to have floral foam, which wouldn't biodegrade, and it became very unfashionable for people to use that. It's very easy to use if you've got fairly stiff stems and you want to create a flower arrangement, very quick. However, you know, the what did you call those things? Frogs.
Frogs. Yeah.
Frogs.
Frogs.
Yeah.
I remember, you know, see, my Granny Gray had glass ones with holes in, and you used to put them in the bottom of a vase. And now you've got these ones, which used to be called pin holders, because they've got sharp pins on the top, and you can sort of push the stems in. Now, if you use those and you make a lovely framework of fairly solid, shall we say, shrubby type stems, you can then push your softer stems in between. And you've got a self-supporting flower arrangement that's not going to hurt the environment whatsoever. It's a wonderful way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, these, I believe these, so the Japanese name is Kenzan, which means sword mountain. And I think that makes a lot more sense than flower frog, which, you know, someone decided to call them here. But, you know, they've been used in Japan, I think, for centuries. And of course, my grannies had them as well. They had drawers, but they used to be made out of steel. Which of course went rusty under the water after a while, but now they make them out of lead and brass, so they're pretty you know, tarnish resistant, and the lead of course makes them nice and heavy to hold.
One little tip I think I would say is if you're arranging something, making an arrangement in a fairly low vase, you do really need to get some kind of fixative underneath that flower frog pin holder or Kenzan, and push it down so that it holds firmly and you don't get something toppling over in the middle of a dinner party or something like that.
Yes, there's something called museum putty, I think, which you can use, which is which obviously won't affect your bowl or the Kenzan. It's sort of inert, but it will sort of hold it in place. Because some of the really old vases and bowls, you know, probably from the 20s and 30s, used to have sort of special recesses, you know, manufactured into them where the frog would sit. But they do just have, you know, as you say, you can use any kind of low bowl.
What prompted me to say that was when many years ago I studied Ikebana, the Japanese art flower arranging, if you like, not terribly seriously, but I mean, you know, you suddenly have one stem going up and going on, probably at an angle, and that angle is going to tip if you don't actually secure the frog at the base. So yeah,
I think that's the other lovely thing about arranging like that is, of course, it is all about sort of celebrating the natural shape and the quirky shape. So I take it out, but I was, you know, in normal flower arranging, you know, a slightly wonky fern leaf like that would not be the one that you would choose, whereas in Ikebana or sort of slightly more contemporary, you know, that is a, you know, something to be celebrated, that it's slightly wonky and off center. So so embrace those wonky branches.
And your flower frogs, are they something that can be found on the Dan Cooper Garden website?
Yes, they can. Of course they can. Yes. So I've got various different sizes. And so depending on what sort of container you've got, there's a rectangular one as well, which is good if you've got like an old sandwich plate or something like that you can use. So yes.
Dare I say that they make wonderful Christmas presents, ladies and gentlemen.
They do, and there's lots of different bowls. There's a daisy, and of course you've got to have a bit of good old cabbage ware as well, which again that looks lovely with, you know, sort of, especially I just find that even wildflowers look really good, because that slightly more contemporary and naturalistic look is sort of suits a flower frog really, as long as you've got, as Alan said, you've got some stiff stems in there to support some of the more fragile ones. You're away really.
Yeah, I was in a garden centre the other day and I was slightly traumatized to discover that they were already putting the Christmas display out, and there were actual Christmas trees, not yet dressed, but they'd started the process of turning the garden centre into a Christmas grotto.
But I know we sometimes grumble about that we say, oh look, it's the end of August, and, so, but you know, sometimes if you're thinking about it, The reason for doing that is to give you an idea, give the general public an idea or a theme or something like that. And if they want to, I mean, it gives them the chance to budget when you're buying Christmas decorations. And I know
get in there before they're all bought, because as I've
well,
now discovered,
I'm just going to talk about that because a certain Mr. Dan Cooper, who I know quite well, has the most amazing arrangement of or range of Christmas decorations. And to me, they are the kind of Christmas decorations that you hand down to your, the next generation, because they're just so exquisite. Take it away, Dan.
I'm sorry for anybody who has that same feeling that I had in the garden centre at this point, where we start to talk about the C word in September. But if you want to get ahead of the curve and get hold of things before they sell out, you will thank us for doing this now.
Well, of course, my life before Dan Cooper Garden, I was the Christmas buyer at John Lewis. So, and it was the job I always wanted. I spent probably 20-something years waiting for this particular job to come up, because I've always been a bit of a Christmasophile. Is that a word? I don't know. So I had that lovely job, and of course, John Lewis is where people go to sort of see Christmas at its best, I guess, and a huge thing, and people, yes, going back to your thing about the garden centres, every year people used to say, oh, it's too early, Christmas gets earlier every year. Well, when I first started in 1996, I think it was, we used to launch Christmas in the very first week of September, and it actually got later and later as time went on, not earlier and earlier. So that's interesting, but you can't tell people that because they won't have. But when I moved on from John Lewis and set up Dan Cooper Garden, I couldn't quite bring myself to leave Christmas behind. And I also had just such lovely suppliers that I really wanted to sort of carry on working with them. So I was just very selective, and chose to work with some in Poland who make things in the good old-fashioned way. So just how they were always made, sort of mouth blown, hand decorated, not mass produced at all, and just lots of lovely details. So the bestseller last year, which I think you know already, of course, was the greenhouse.
Yeah, well, you very kindly gave me one of those, and I've got it, and I shall treasure it forever. I mean, that is just a superb Christmas decoration, isn't it?
I've got some new ones for you this year, Alan, which I shall have to send you. But so that one is back, and then we also have a pomegranate this year, which is new, and I don't know if you can see, but the little glistening fruits in there, little peps in there, which I love. And then it's sort of just slightly split open on the back, which I think is lovely.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
opulent as well.
I have done the unthinkable, and I have done a gnome. So, yeah, I'm sure the RHS would be turning in their compost heap. But we have a gnome for this year, and because glass is not everybody's cup of tea, and if you've got kids and like babies, children, and pets around, you don't necessarily want them. I've done some felt ones this year as well. So we have the least harmful snail that you will ever have in your garden, and it's so funny because I have taken these out a couple of times already, and children, the snail and the caterpillar, they literally, you can see the hands because there's that, I'd forgotten actually until I saw it happening, how fascinated you are when you're a child with snail. I remember keeping snails in boxes, and probably what you shouldn't really do, but it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? So you see these little hands going for the caterpillar and the snail, and then of course everybody loves bees, so there's a cheerful little bee there.
That's lovely, very happy.
Yeah, which I feel could end up being a sort of cat toy, if fallen from the tree. It's just the sort of thing a cat would like to bash around with its paws, isn't it? But anyway, no harm can come to anybody with the
they're lovely. It's funny you say the thing about the children and the caterpillars and the slugs. Bear with me. I just have to step across to the play mat because I got this from the Cambridge University Botanic Garden shop. It's a happy little caterpillar that Viola finds completely. I mean, I love that sound. He finds that very fascinating. But yes, we're building a love of garden pests in our kids with all of these.
It's quite mesmerizing to look at on the camera, so I can only imagine.
It's the sound. I hope you're getting that kind of castanet sound. So I'm quite a fan of him, probably more than some of the caterpillars who've been eating my brassicas. But anyway, I'll put him on my lap.
Yes, well, we went on a walk yesterday, and John, my other half, found this fascinating moth, which I had to admit was very pretty. So it was white with like a completely sort of brown edge around its wings. And John said, well, what do you think it is? And I said, well, it looks a bit like a tablecloth, so maybe we'll call it a tablecloth moth. But we got home, of course, and Googled it, as you must. And of course, it is the blessed box moth caterpillar. It's box moth, isn't it?
It's like me the first time I saw one in my garden or on my window. Oh, that's so beautiful. What could it possibly be?
And they are, I mean, it's tragic down here because our local park has had a lot of box hedges in it, not very well cared for, because the maintenance is sort of at rock bottom at the moment. But of course, they just went through it, and there's this sort of skeletal hedge around lots of the areas in the park. And I think a lot of people that I know in Kent and Sussex that have had an outbreak earlier in the year and now having another one. So you've got to be very, very vigilant. I don't know. What do you do there, Alan?
Throw it away, Dan. I really do. I can't. I mean, I noticed in a pair of topiary columns in pots. I mean, one of them's got it terribly, and I just thought, well, that's going on the bonfire heap. I'm not going to keep it because it's another job, and it's a job that's ongoing, if you see what I mean, because you just mentioned, you get the first generation, then there's a second generation, and there'll be a third if the weather's open and mild enough. So, rather than spend the money on the chemicals that you have to get to deal with it, and you've got to pay then somebody to actually administer the chemical and everything else, I would rather use something else for my topiary. And at the moment, my favorite thing to use for topiary is you, I have to say. And, when you're starting with a piece of topiary, and this is something that you can, if you've got, if you've got a grandchild or a child, Thordis, I'm thinking of you, you can actually, when you find a little yew seedling growing in somewhere, dig it up and put it in a pot. And actually you can, if you buy something like aluminium wire, which is very, very bendy, you can turn it into sort of shapes. You can make it into a bonsai or something like that. It's not instant, I have to say that. But, it's rather nice to think that you can, a yew seedling, I mean, we have them in the garden here all the time because we have yew, and they get bird sown everywhere. And we dig them up and we line them out in a row, and then we'll use them as a hedge somewhere. And it is very satisfying. They started life with you in the garden and they're still there. So my go-to is you.
Oh, to have 32 acres, hey? Line out a hedge.
Well, I was going to say this at the beginning, but of course, Alan's garden does have to be seen to be believed, I think. I mean, obviously I had heard lots of things and seen lots of pictures, but you have to be in a garden to understand a garden, don't you? You can look at as many pictures as you like. So I've got a very easy garden to get lost in as well. Not for you, Alan, but for the rest of us. I was there with my guide, holding very hard to my guidebook, thinking, no, I really must be here, but I'm not. But and easy to miss things as well. So
well, part of the fascination, I think, really, when we designed the garden, Graham and I together, and we did it for ourselves, by ourselves, without any outside help. But what we did is we kind of did a straightforward vista from here to there. And I mean, James Alexander Sinclair did when he said the bish bash thing at the end, and the bish bash is the left and the right. So you go off a tangent left and right. So you're looking at the thing at the end, which is leading your eye, and you want to go down there, but then there's a right turn and a left turn off at an angle, and you think, well, if I go down there, I might miss something down here. But that
was exactly what my experience was.
I also think the different garden rooms, they can be different depending on where you enter from. I mean, particularly the exotic garden, if you come at it through that wonderful wooden structure, and then you kind of look at the big fountain at the other end, or you can emerge at one end or from the side through a gate or through some bamboo under some plants. It's a totally different experience of how you neat that garden room.
Yeah, it is. No, it is.
Yeah, and of course that, I mean, historically as well, like with gardens like Stourhead, that was all completely contrived and staged so that the garden was experienced in a very specific order, wasn't it? So all of this, you plunged into some dark grotto and then out into the light and all of that. It was a, and I guess it's the same with Alan's garden. You could walk around it in two different directions and get a very different sort of experience and perspective on it. But what a joy to have that, the ability to do that. Unfortunately, my garden, you can sort of walk into and then turn around and walk back out again.
But it doesn't stop you growing interesting plants, Dan, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I can look down on it from above, which I have to say is a particular joy sometimes as well, because I have a very tall house. And if I look out of my window here just in front of me, I can look down on it. And of course it looks completely different from an aerial view. And fascinating to see how the plants arrange themselves as well to sort of maximize the light they're getting, because you don't see that from ground level, particularly with the way the bananas and then the fatsias come up in between, and the ricinus and all of that. It looks brilliant from above.
It reminds me of the David Attenborough Green Planet, when they would talk about how all the different plants kind of grew through each other to get to the light. You can really appreciate those relationships when you get the aerial view.
Yes, you can, yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, you've certainly given me all kinds of FOMO today. FOMO being that fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant. And people must follow the Frustrated Gardener and Dan Cooper Garden on Instagram. I mean, your Frustrated Gardener brand is obviously like a decade and more in the making, and you can just scroll back through that Instagram for years of planty inspiration. I have taken my FOMO from your Dahlia grid, because finally I've had my allotment, and although it's been quite the adventure trying to manage a newborn and an allotment and sort of a garden, though that's been very neglected, it's so I'm so distracted. My dog is sitting here just wagging her tail at me, wanting tickles, because Daddy's been out for the last hour and she wants to know why it's not about her. But anyway, back to the dahlias. I finally was able to put a Halls of Hedon order in. I had these beautiful garden ready plants that came in June, and I have been loving all the blooms. Amusingly, I put the whole order in for Edith Jones, that gorgeous pink collarette that you brought along podcasts ago. Obviously, that would be the one that didn't actually arrive. So that was mislabeled. And I think from looking through their catalogue of plants, it might be, it's gone into Dilys Ayling, I think, has come instead of Edith Jones.
Dilys Ayling is red.
Yes, it is red with a lovely kind of ruffly collarette, and it's absolutely beautiful and actually has combined quite well in my arrangements. But I'm still missing Edith Jones, so I'll pursue Edith Jones. That's still a FOMO from you from before. I did get Hollyhill Serenity, which was probably my favourite for impact as you walked onto the allotment. So thank you very much for suggesting that one. It so floriferous and such a kind of beacon. And that led me on to your Dahlia Blyton Softer Gleam, because to me it had an air of Hollyhill Serenity about it, that kind of peachy yellow petal, but a smaller pom-pom rather than a bigger kind of water lily, I suppose, flower. Bit of apricot and orange in there, obviously, to keep me happy. And you said that there were so many colours in it that you could see even from a distance. And I have really enjoyed that with the allotment, being able unlike in my garden, to appreciate flowers from a distance. So I'm assuming, as it ended up on the grid, that Blyton Softer Gleam is one that you're a fan of.
Yes, yes. There aren't many I'm not a fan of. I mean, some, yes, I sort of tire of. As I said at the beginning, you know, it really is the big flowered dinner plate ones that I'm a bit like, I'm not sure.
Aside from the dinner plates, are there any you've grown that are going out just because you don't think they're very good, or they're not a good performer, or they age badly, or something?
Some don't form the best tubers, and they sort of dwindle a little bit. I don't know if there's any. I mean, yes, there is one that, well, you know, I mean, Alan knows this well, you know, gardening as a partnership does occasionally cause some, you know, heated debates. But there's one called Frost Nip, which John likes, but I sort of think it literally does look like sort of overcooked salmon with sort of fat on it. It's sort of it's not an attractive shade of anything. And yeah, I don't like the look of it. It's a bit too, I don't like anything that looks a bit fleshy. You know what I mean? In colour. So that's not a favourite.
Yeah, there's a fine line between that lovely antique colour that's very on vogue and flesh, which very few people probably like. I also was a big fan of Dahlia Megandine, which was it Megandine? Basically as unlike anything I grow as possible. And I'm not exactly sure how I would use it, because I'm not sure. I might have to buy one or two other things to go with it. But these lovely lilac pink pom-poms in that almost bluey kind of tone from the picture.
I'm very tall. Did you find it very tall?
I haven't grown it. No, this was just
you haven't.
Pure Flomo.
Further back in the border though for that one, it does grow very tall and quite upright, so that's a good one, yeah, for the back.
Talking of tall, actually, and dahlias, but more species, I think I heard on your lovely Too Good Gardener podcast that you were very excited about your Dahlia imperialis.
Oh my goodness, I am quite well. It never pays to get too excited about Dahlia imperialis because the weather can ruin things for you. But we, as I say, we didn't get that. We got the cold weather that everyone else got, but it wasn't as cold. And our straight Dahlia imperialis, which we're beginning to wonder whether it is straight Dahlia imperialis, because the flowers seem to be quite large for imperialis, but that flowered like we've never seen last year, and then of course it got cold and it was over pretty quickly. But this year they are almost 6 weeks ahead of where they would normally be. I cannot explain why. So Dahlia imperialis does that, you know, obviously shoots skyward and it's sort of about 10 foot tall, but when it's thinking very slowly about flowering, it starts to produce side branches, and it's been doing that for a good few weeks already, so it's starting to look very branched. And every time I sort of look up at it and think, is there a sign of a bird? Is there isn't yet, but it's still very early for flowers. But we also have two unnamed Dahlia imperialis variations, maybe, one of which has dark-ish coloured leaves, and that has never flowered. And so we are just sort of waiting with bated breath to see if that might do something, because allegedly it has sort of deep rose pink verging on sort of magenta coloured flowers, and I would really like to see if it has, but who knows? I mean, Alan knows as well as I do that it's a waiting game with Dahlia imperialis.
It is a very, very good waiting game. We have Dahlia something or other that came from Crigg Farm, which is a very tall growing tree dahlia with relatively small purpley mauve flowers, but that flowers very early. It flowers in July and it's still flowering now. And I originally bought it and it cost me £50 for a tuber and £25 for carriage. And I thought, you mad fool, but I managed to get to divide the tuber into 3 or 5 or something like that. And we've taken cuttings since, so we've got quite a lot of it. But they are space consuming, Dan, aren't they? I mean, these big dahlias, they consume an awful lot of space.
Space, and well, I was growing on the allotment, so they're slightly more excused. But we grew potatoes in the bed next to them, and honestly, I had a better crop of dahlia roots than I had potatoes, because they send roots out everywhere, and of course they are immense plants, so the roots are not small, and of course they're virtually becoming tuberous, and they take everything out of the soil as well. So the potatoes that were nearest the Dahlia imperialis were puny, low cropping little things, because I think whether it was water or nutrients, they had literally hoovered the lot up. So it's a plant for splendid isolation, or, you know, it's a greedy plant, but spectacular.
Yeah. Well, going on to, I'm thinking, still on the theme of dahlias. I wasn't going to mention a dahlia because I thought this has done dahlia justice. But there's one I've just been waiting to see if anybody's mentioned it. You haven't, neither of you have. And so I thought I would mention it. And it's a very small pom-pom, and it's called Rococo. And it grows to about 3 feet tall, and it has the most startling purple magenta little balls of flower. I mean, they are absolutely, it's a bit like a pointless painting. You see it across the garden and you think, what is that? And that's one that I've had it in the ground for 10 years probably, and there it sits again, a little bit, as Dan just said, in splendid isolation, but it shouldn't be. It should be more. So I'm going to dig that one up and make sure that I label it, and we'll propagate from cuttings early next year. That's one part of my Flomo thing, and I've written some lovely Flomo down from you for this as well, but I'm just going to go on to a big dahlia again, which is Dahlia campanulata, which has those lovely sort of jagged white bells with a purple throat. Now, whether we'll get flowers on it or not, I don't know. I have just been joined by a noisy cat. I don't know whether you can hear it.
I've had my noisy dog. You've got your noisy cat. Have you shut your dogs away, Dan?
Well, of course, because John's here, they're safely with him behaving.
But for going back to today's podcast, I decided that I mentioned my lovely little shady area where I put Canna aridiflora. And, you know, there's so many things that you can grow in shade that is beautiful. And Dan, you've just woke me up to beautiful, bountiful bomarias. And I think that I've got to have this big one, which I think was...
Sibyldiana, I think.
Sibyldiana, yep. Sibyldiana netalianus. By the way, that's not a name, that was a joke.
Now,
I just say this, watch it, because she has a sting in her tail. Anyway, so bomarias and Dahlia Rococo, they're my two plants that I really must, one I must get, and the other I must propagate.
Dan, what's your Flomo then?
Well, I don't know so I had a moment when I was at Alan's lovely plant fair in September, and I was all set up, and I was all sort of composed and like ready for the off, and of course people came in, and then this lady walked past me with this I don't know, it looked like the Queen Mother's hat, this sort of mauve.
Yeah, I know what this is.
Thing emerging out of a bag, and I was literally, so I think there were people, and I was like, oh, when you like kind of drawn away to is that, and I thought, I'm pretty good at identifying a plant, but I thought, well, it's not a hydrangea, what is it, what is this thing? Anyway, of course, it wasn't until I eventually got to walk around Alan's garden and went into the greenhouse and saw that it was, in fact, a Solanum, Solanum wendlandii, which is the most spectacular thing, although I have subsequently discovered, since Alan kindly gifted me a plant, that it's also quite spiny. So it keeps hooking itself to my trousers when I walk past it, but it is, it's just one of those staggeringly beautiful, unusual things that sort of get my juices flowing, really. So it's if I'm correct, Alan, it has these sort of has very long sort of arching stems that probably are self-clinging because of all of these little hooks that probably help it to attach to things, with a very interesting leaf that almost sort of makes it look sort of a bit of a fishbone sort of structure as it comes out. And then at the end of these beautiful sort of arching draping stems are these heads of the most sort of luxurious sort of mauve Solanum flowers, but they're kind of bigger and more buxom and more sort of ripply than the normal ones. You know, it's not like your average Solanum. So yeah, so that was, I mean, it wasn't Flomo for long because Alan very kindly satisfied my desire and found one for me. But
how lovely.
But that, yes, what I mean, I think it's going to go and live in the bathroom for the winter because we don't have a heated greenhouse, and I think it likes to be quite hot and steamy, if I'm right, Alan. Is that right?
Well, I don't know about steamy, but it likes to be warm.
Yes.
And it's I mean, I grow, I take cuttings of it every year, and I suppose I probably get no more than about a 30% take on my cuttings, and they're very, very slow because you tug away at the cutting and you think, oh, it's rooted, but it doesn't make any top growth, and you know it's very slow into growth. The mother plant is very slow into growth anyway. She's deciduous, so loses the leaves in the winter. And then the following year, she's very slow into growth, and the babies are too. And it wasn't until probably middle of May, beginning of June, before they started to put, the one I gave you, before it started to put foliage out. And then they grow. Once they start, they go.
Yes,
but you have to play the waiting game, I'm afraid.
It is going now. Yes, it's the bits that were just beginning are really sort of extending out now. So that's very exciting. The other craving that you satisfied, Alan, was Iochroma fuchsioides, which I had a beautiful one for many, many years, and then I was idle or irresponsible, whichever you want to call it, and I think I left it outside a little bit too long. Didn't particularly like it, but this is a plant that I first ever saw in a garden called Lamorin, I think, in Cornwall in St Maurs, and they had this spectacular one in an urn. And you it's one of those plants, you look at it and you think, is it a fuchsia? Is it, is it something else? But it's an Iochroma with flowers a bit like Fuchsia boliviana, but maybe not quite as long.
Yeah.
And again, you had one, so it's now in pride of place in our garden room, looking very, very healthy and flowering beautifully. So that was a delight to find that again. And the one I'm going to have to wait patiently for is your climbing Mexican daisy, which is it Senecio confusus? I think
it used to be called Senecio confusus, but I think it's been renamed now. But I think for general talking as we are now, is enough, because that's what most people would know it of, if they know it at all. It comes from Guatemala, and it is this sort of, it's not a climber, it's a scrambler, because it doesn't cling and it doesn't tendrilize or anything like that. But you can train it up an obelisk and things like that. It has the most amazing bright red bunches of daisy flowers on it, and it is truly, I'll tell you, I was really, really flattered, because two of probably Britain's most famous garden designers, Isabel Bannerman and Julian. And Julian came to the garden one day and he just had to have it. And I did have plants of it. But again, it's one that I don't have in huge supply. It's not difficult to grow from cuttings, and you will be satisfied with one next year, Dan, I promise.
But I mean, that's the lovely thing about your garden, that you see unexpected things that you maybe can't easily identify. It's very, as somebody who loves plants, it's very sort of stimulating to go around. You don't always want to go around and go, oh, I know that one, or I've grown that. You want to go and visit, I want to go and visit gardens where you're thinking, not only do you see plants you're not familiar with, but they're brilliantly well, not just grown for survival. They're grown so that they are absolutely at their peak of sort of health and possibilities. So I mean, because you have it going up either side of a door. Is it a door or a window?
A window, yeah.
just spectacular to see it like that.
Even if afterwards you do have a real sense of inadequacy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just have to get over that.
That plant will grow from a small cutting to a 6-foot plant in a season easily.
Amazing.
Or it does at East Ruston anyway.
I suppose it's a bit like a climbing tithonia, isn't it? It's that kind of colour of orange, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
And I must say, I finally, after years of meaning to grow tithonia and not really having anywhere to put it, I had tithonia at the allotment this year, and my goodness, that was a FLOMO fulfilled, and I absolutely loved it. It's such a glorious orange. If you love orange, you have to grow it.
And have you felt it as well?
Oh yes, it's so touchy.
The most strokeable plant ever, I think.
I always think it feels clammy.
Do you?
Oh no, it's all felty and lovely.
Oh, I know. I think it's peachy.
Oh, it's been such a joy, Dan. I have loved it. If people want more of you in their life, obviously they can follow your exploits and buy from you, but they can also hear you. Series 2 of Two Good Gardeners is back with Julia Parker. So first episode out already. By the time this is in the world, who knows? There may be 2, 3.
There will be another one, yes, possibly.
So go get more of Dan in your life on the podcast as well, and yeah, I'll just continue following you and getting tons and tons of FLOMO. But until next time, happy gardening, everybody.
Happy gardening, everybody. Happy gardening.
I've got so much FLOMO because I've been to Alan's garden now, so that's
I think I'm being stabbed by something that's in the pocket of my pouch. Hang on. Yeah, I think I've got like a garden knife sticking me in the leg. Something. Right, move that. I'm all right now. Right.
so.
But one of the great things.
I just think it's absolutely brilliant, and people, yeah.
One of the great things.
We had like a lost connection moment. So you just sort
I've lost you.
Oh,
Oh.
there we go.
Are we back?
Are we back? Can we all hear each other?
I think we are.
Right, go, Alan.
And just lots and lots and lots of details. Should we wait for Alan to come back?
Either you've offended him or he's going to get his greenhouse.
I hope that Alan hasn't got his Christmas decorations out the roof already. That really is dedication, isn't it?
I hoped you were going to get your greenhouse, Alan.